So this is the lecture given in class about anatomy and physiology, so it's the first lecture for physiology. In every lecture in the class, we'll have some type of essential question, so everything that we're doing is going to kind of revolve around it, and in this particular case, it's how are they different and the same? So distinguishing between anatomy and physiology. First of all, I've made note of how you take notes in class. I would like everything to be done in Cornell note fashion, and what I will do every day afterwards as your admission ticket into the class will be showing me that you did things. So the first day, obviously we'll take notes. Don't copy things down verbatim. It's a waste of time. It's listen, watch, adjust what you need to have. Draw pictures if that's what you need. Don't take notes on things that you already know. That's just dumb. For homework that night, I'm going to ask that you write down some key questions that you think I'm probably going to ask you. And I did give you test objectives, so you might want to look at those test objectives and see how they correlate with the notes. I'm going to check that the day after you take notes. The 2 days after you take notes, what I'm going to check for is, did you summarize your Cornell notes? I don't want them done the night before. Do them in the order that I would like them done. Obviously, if you need to hurry stuff up because if for those of you who are an avid and you need to do that, okay, that's what you need to do. But for the summary of your notes, what I would like you to do is try and explain your notes as briefly as you can, but explain them to a 5-year-old. So if that means you need to sit there and speak it out loud to summarize it, then that's what you need to do. Science, for the sake of saying it, what we're going to try and do is understand the world using a natural phenomenon or a natural explanation. We don't use deities, we don't use magic. We use things that we can actually test and verify and redo over and over and over again. We don't like one-time flukes. Anatomy and physiology has been one of those things that we've actually been studying through science for a very long time. And we've tried to explain how we think things work because we can never really see it. So we've been trying for a while on this. Anatomy, which is how things are built, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words. In class, I showed an anatomy book, and it's just a bunch of pictures and words, which usually makes you say, yay, except that you realize you can't pronounce any of these words, like pectoralis major deltoid biceps. Actually, it should be biceps brachii, then the palmaris longus, the flexor carpi radialis, then the brachioradialis, and the flexor digitorum superficialis, and the lubricum. Then you have the gluteus medius, the tensor fasciae latae, the rectus femoris, the pectineus, the sartorius, the adductor longus, gracilis, tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius, and soleus. I just read that list. Not a single lick of that is normal English. The nice part is, all of those words meant something. So, for example, here where it said flexor carpi radialis, that means it's going to flex your wrist, and the muscle is found on the radial, or found on the radius, which is one of your bones. The names tell you where they are, or what they do, or what they're going to look like. So the posterior superior alveolar artery is going to be found in the back and on top of where your teeth are, hence an alveolus, which is a pocket or a bubble. And hey, look, your teeth are about right there, and that's where you find that artery. The names actually make sense. The catch is, we need to learn to interpret them. Physiology, on the other hand, is how something works. It's pictures. It's diagrams. You look at this and you say, oh, there's going to be words involved with this, but the words are in English. You have a bubble. The bubble moves to the end of this thing that we'll call a nerve. The bubble fuses with the end of the nerve, and the contents of the bubble spill out into a hole. The contents of the bubble, or that were in the bubble, move across this hole. We'll call it a cleft or a synapse, and they bind or they attach to a nerve on the other side. It's a bunch of explanations. It's a bunch of animations. It's a bunch of movies. But I used words that you understood. The catch with physiology is we usually like to study it when it goes wrong. Pathophysiology, the functioning of disease, is usually highly fascinating. The problem is we need to know what do you have, or how does it normally work? This picture here at the bottom, which I didn't make bigger, I apologize for that. That would be if you have pneumonia. Here's what's going on, and here's everything that happens inside of your body, and here's what we have to do about it from pneumonia. But this is for a 3-year-old. If it were for a 5-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 90-year-old, things turn out differently. Physiology, it's flow charts, it's diagrams, but it's not big, weird, scary words. In class, I also showed you a physiology book. Our knowledge of anatomy hasn't changed too much. Occasionally we'll sit there and say, okay, yeah, we agree. We now think we know that this thing inside of your intestines, we'll call it the mesenteries. Yeah, those really are its own unique organ. So I guess we'll change that. So we have a brand new organ. It took us knowing about it for a couple hundred years before we changed our minds on it. How physiology turns out to work, that changes all the time. We used to think that you were just a whole bunch of liquids or humors, and that was how we based upon, or how your health was based. Well, that's kind of a little bit off, and since then we've slowly been refining what we understand of how you turn out to function. When we look at anatomy, you're based upon smaller parts, meaning an organism is based upon you having these things called organ systems, which are based upon having organs. Organs are made out of these things called tissues. Tissues are made out of these things called cells. Cells are made out of molecules. Molecules are made out of atoms. Anatomy is always based upon something smaller. Physiology, on the other hand, is always based upon tiny functional parts. Like if you want to know how a muscle works, you need to talk about the muscles that make up the muscle cells. So the actual muscle protein, and that tells you about how it does its job. When we look at cells, because cells turn out to be kind of in both, big deal about them is protein. Protein is in common with both. They're in common of all cells, and proteins tend to do a lot of stuff. These are pictures of, I actually don't remember what type of cells. These might be fibroblasts. No doubt it's a decent guess. But different proteins are stained in them, and you get different looking pictures, and usually they're insanely pretty. So when we look at anatomy and physiology, I can't teach you an anatomy class unless we talk some physiology, and I definitely can't teach you some physiology unless we talk some anatomy, because there is some heavy overlap between the two. So the question becomes for you to answer, so how do we distinguish between them? How are they different, but how are they actually the same? That's a puzzle for you to solve.